split the money, with Abdulrahman and Ahmed bringing their share home. Their father had passed away the year before, and their mother was of fragile health and mind, so all funds they earned fishing went toward the welfare of the house they shared with 10 siblings. Abdulrahman and Ahmed didn't care much about the money, though. They would have done it for free. 34 years later, and thousands of miles west, Abdulrahman Zeitoun was in bed on a Friday morning, slowly leaving the moonless Jable night, a tattered memory of it caught in a morning dream. He was in his home in New Orleans, and beside him he could hear his wife Kathy breathing, her exhalations not unlike the shushing of water against the hull of a wooden boat. Otherwise, the house was silent. He knew it was near 6 o'clock, and the peace wouldn't last. The morning light usually woke the kids once it reached their second-story windows. One of the 4 would open his or her eyes, and from there the movements were brisk, the house quickly growing loud. With one child awake, it was impossible to keep the other 3 in bed. Kathy woke to a thump upstairs, coming from one of the kids' rooms. She listened closely, praying silently for rest. Each morning there was a delicate period, between 6 and 6:30, when there was a chance, however remote, that they could steal another 10 or 15 minutes of sleep. But now there was another thump, and the dog barked, and another thump followed. What was happening in this house? Kathy looked to her husband. He was staring at the ceiling. The day had roared to life. The phone began ringing, today as always, before their feet hit the floor. Kathy and Zeitoun, most people called him by his last name because they couldn't pronounce his first, ran a company, Zeitoun A Painting Contractor, LLC, and every day their crews, their clients, everyone with a phone and their number, seemed to think that once the clock struck 6:30, it was appropriate to call. And they called. Usually there were so many calls at the stroke of 6:30 that the overlap would send half of them straight to voicemail. Kathy took the first one, from a client across town, while Zeitoun shuffled into the shower. Fridays were always busy, but this one promised madness, given the rough weather on the way. There'd been rumblings all week about a tropical storm crossing the Florida Keys, a chance it might head north. Though this kind of possibility presented itself every August and didn't raise eyebrows for most, Kathy and Zeitoun's more cautious clients and friends often made preparations. Throughout the morning, the callers would want to know if Zeitoun could board up their windows and doors, if he'd be clearing his equipment off their property before the winds came. Workers would want to know if they'd be expected to come in that day or the next. Zeitoun Painting Contractors, Kathy said, trying to sound alert. It was an elderly client, a woman living alone in a Garden District mansion, asking if Zeitoun's crew could come over and board up her windows. Sure, of course, Kathy said, letting her feet drop heavily to the floor. She was up. Kathy was the business's secretary, bookkeeper, credit department, public relations manager. She did everything in the office, while her husband handled the building and painting. The two of them balanced each other well. Zeitoun's English had its limits, so when bills had to be negotiated, hearing Kathy's Louisiana drawl put clients at ease. This was part of the job, helping clients prepare their homes for coming winds. Kathy hadn't given much thought to the storm this client was talking about. It took a lot more than a few downed trees in South Florida to get her attention. "We'll have a crew come over this afternoon," Kathy told the woman. Kathy and Zeitoun had been married for 11 years. Zeitoun had come to New Orleans in 1994 by way of Houston and Baton Rouge and a half-dozen other American cities he'd explored as a young man. Kathy had grown up in Baton Rouge and was used to the hurricane routine, the litany of preparations, the waiting and watching, the power outages, the candles and flashlights and buckets catching rain. There seemed to be a half-dozen